Welcome, everyone, to the Dr. Pete Goldman Show, where we bring you fascinating guests to learn from. Now, when I interview people, some of the people I interview, I never met before. I don't know. Some of them I know on some level. Some of them I'm friends with. But today, I get to interview one of my best friends, multi-time world Jiu Jitsu champ, Denny Prokopos. Welcome, Denny.
What's up, Dr. Pete? How you doing?
Doing good. Denny's in San Francisco at the moment. And what I wanted to start by asking Denny, just to kick it off, is how did you, obviously, you became a world champion in martial arts. You're one of the best jiu-jitsu guys I ever saw. How did it start? Like, when did you start martial arts? How did that journey begin for you in your childhood?
How my martial arts journey began? I lived around the corner from a Taekwondo school, right? And that place was right across the street also from my parents' restaurant. And my mom thought it would be a good reason to put my brother and I in martial arts. And at the time I was 4 years old. And so she put us, and we started training Taekwondo, but also too, my dad always used to put on a lot of like martial arts movies from like when I was a child. I don't remember what my earliest one would be, but I grew up watching Bruce Lee, Steven Seagal, a lot of 1980s martial arts movies, because that was a big era of martial arts movies. Like, they were always playing on my TV. And I was just always fascinated by martial arts, but all the martial art movies that I watched, they like had no jujitsu in them. They were all basically more like kung fu movies, right? You didn't see that much jujitsu in them, but like my earliest memory to martial arts would be my mom putting me in Taekwondo, right? And then the movies. I would say those are my earliest memories. And also too, now that I understand this, because boxing is a martial art. A lot of people don't think of it like it is, but it is. Also too, when I was a child, my dad would get the boxing matches. He would put them on TV. He used to love those. I grew up watching Mike Tyson. I was very lucky.
Question for you. When you just let me interject for a second. When you mention Bruce Lee and Steven Seagal, some of the first guys you got to watch, sometimes people have like a soft spot in their heart for kind of like the origins of something. So even though you may have, with your martial arts knowledge and your jiu-jitsu experience, surpassed, let's say, what maybe Steven Seagal could do with Aikido, do you still have kind of a soft spot in your heart for like putting on an old Steven Seagal movie and checking out some of the moves, or are you kind of beyond that?
I'll definitely watch a Steven Seagal movie. Absolutely. Absolutely. Have I ever watched it to study technique? I can't say that I have. However, if I'm watching a movie and the guy does some type of technique, it doesn't matter who it is, and I think there's something to it, I'm going to play with it. It doesn't matter what martial art it's from. All I have to think is, wow, there's something to that. I think I can use that, or there's something interesting to this. Maybe we can mix this in this way, and that's it.
Cool. How did you go from a 4-year-old in Taekwondo to one day even having an interest in, an awareness of, and then actually starting Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
Okay. So, a few years went by. I kept doing Taekwondo. And then I was introduced to judo at the school. They said they offered a judo class once a week. They said, if you want, you can come, but it wasn't, looking back, it was just like a separate thing. It wasn't anything really serious, The Taekwondo was the main thing of the school, but the judo they had, right? I started training judo. I believe I was 6 at the time. And I fell in love with it. It made way more sense to me than Taekwondo. I was actually terrible at Taekwondo. I was good at the kicks. I was terrible at the forms. And I didn't, from a young child, by the way, the forms didn't make sense to me. The movements didn't make sense. They didn't make sense to me. They just didn't. I don't know why, but from a young child, I remember thinking, this does not make sense. I don't like doing this. Everything in judo made sense. Everything. The throwing, the pinning, the choking, the sparring, the drilling. I loved everything. And I kept training with judo, and that was the first time I actually ever won at anything in my life. Or even, and I beat my brother too for the first time at anything. We ended up competing. We ended up doing this inside school tournament, right? My brother was 3 years older than me, is 3 years older than me. And we made it to the finals, and we fought each other, and I beat him. It was fun. And I was like, wow, there's actually something that I'm better than my older brother than,
Question, when, for those who don't know, and obviously people who watch this, some are quite familiar with martial arts, some are semi-familiar with martial arts, some people are unfamiliar with martial arts. But for those who don't know, judo has a standing tradition, meaning there's a lot of where you're standing and you're throwing. And actually, judo does have, at one point, quite a bit, and maybe now it's having a resurgence, a ground tradition where they do fight on the ground and grapple on the ground, and it actually looks, semi close to some Brazilian jiu-jitsu that you would see these days. When you were at that judo school, did they do any ground fighting, or once you were thrown and the pin was made, they just kind of stood back up, or did they kind of show you how to do the ground fighting?
It's been a long time. It's been now like 28 years ago, right? So here's what I remember. I remember being taught throws, pins, chokes, and I'm pretty sure arm bars. But the concept of the guard, I don't remember learning.
How did you?
So I stopped. I don't really remember. Oh, I stopped. We stopped because I didn't want to do Taekwondo, and because I didn't want to do Taekwondo, that meant I couldn't do judo. So I stopped training, right? Then fast forward a few years, I still have this interest in martial arts. I still have this interest in martial arts, and also too, at the time, the school, look, in San Francisco, you're going to school, you're going to public school. At the time that I was going, how can I say this? I got into a lot of fights, and I started thinking I probably should, start training martial arts or something again. And then then I ended up meeting one of my dad's friends that was a Japanese Jiu Jitsu black belt and a black belt in karate, I believe. Like a double black belt. He was showing me Japanese Jiu Jitsu and karate, and I really liked it. I loved it, actually.
You just like in the living room, like just that he'd stop by and show you.
Actually, no, this is funny. I would hang out at my parents' restaurant, right? And all these Greek people would come to my parents' restaurant, and they would just hang out there. And, Dino was one of my dad's good friends. He was just hanging out. I love talking to Dino, and I just got to the point where he started showing me moves. That's it.
So basically, for those that don't know, both your parents are Greek, and if I'm not mistaken, the first language you spoke was Greek. Am I correct?
Yes. And he was showing me moves, and I really liked what he was showing me. I really, really liked it. I was very interested. Actually, so he ended up moving away, and I got really sad. Because I really liked him as a person, and that I also really liked what he was showing me. So at the time, we had the yellow pages, right? And I opened up the yellow pages. We had 2 huge books in my parents' restaurant. I opened them up and I started looking for jiu-jitsu, right? And I came across at the time Carly Gracie, right? Half and Charles, right? And the closest.
What year is that?
Had to be 2000. Had to be
2000. You look in the yellow pages, in the San Francisco yellow pages for jiu-jitsu, you find Charles Gracie, Half Gracie, and Carly Gracie. Am I right?
Yes. Then I started telling my parents, I'm like, hey, I want to do jiu-jitsu. My dad's like, you're gonna quit. You quit. We're taking you across the street. You quit there, and I'm like, no. Not that
You're
I
like,
quit.
Dad, I was give me a break.
Yeah, and I'm like, I didn't like it. I know I like this, right? So the closest academy to my house was Charles Gracie's. So I started training there. I started training once a week for the first month. Second month, because my brother's 3 years ahead of me, he got his driver's license. The deal was he got his driver's license. He had to take me to jiu-jitsu, right? So I was very lucky.
Why didn't he had no interest in joining at that time? He just wanted to drive you?
He wasn't interested in jiu-jitsu, and I tried. Can't say that I didn't try. I tried, but for whatever reason, he wasn't interested. But the best big brother in the world I could ever say, because he would take me, he would pick me up. He would drive me from Millbrae to Daly City, leave Daly City, come back, pick me up.
And for those who don't know, for those who are semi-familiar with jiu-jitsu, Charles Gracie, if I'm not mistaken, is the son of Hobson Gracie, and Hobson is also the dad of Henzo and Half, but with a different mom, if I'm getting that right.
Correct.
Okay.
So, so I started training in 2000. I started training February 12th, 2001. I was 12 years old. It was about 2 weeks before my 13th birthday. And I fell in love with jiu-jitsu. I fell in love with jiu-jitsu then. I'm still in love with jiu-jitsu today. This love, it has never changed, and it will never change.
There was now, of course,
I'm not gonna lie. I started training in the beginning. I sucked. I wasn't good, but I loved what I was learning. Like, the triangle technique, right? Imagine I had such a hard time remembering the move that I went and I bought a Ken Shamrock book, right? And they had a picture of what it looked like correctly done. I would carry that book with me. Like, I always had it in my backpack because it had all these moves, right? It was hard to get a hold of jiu-jitsu books at the time, right? And before I would go to jiu-jitsu, I would study that. And, I had a really hard time in the beginning learning the moves, but, or not learning them, but like remembering them. Does that make sense? I just had a hard time recalling them, but
No.
I kept studying them. I always had, even now, you fast forward all these years, 21 years, I still, whether it was that little kid or this grown adult, I'm still the same in that I love jiu-jitsu so much, I can study it.
You are a real student of jiu-jitsu, and I've experienced that firsthand by knowing you over the years. What about you ultimately became a world champ multi times over in what's known as NoGi jiu-jitsu, and for those who don't know, that's where you don't wear the jacket or the kimono or the gi, but you might call it. That's where you're competing just wearing a rash guard or a t-shirt or no shirt, and then you're wearing either gi pants or shorts. When you were at Charles Gracie's academy, did they even ever have like once a week no-gi class? Did you even understand that there was this thing called no-gi, or are you just like, you're like, oh, jiu-jitsu, I wear a gi, I don't even know about no-gi?
The first time I mean, here's the thing. I started training jiu-jitsu, right? But before I started training jiu-jitsu, what I forgot to mention this. I was really into pro wrestling, right? Before I was into Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I was really into pro wrestling. And one day there was this place called Suncoast Videos, right? Where you would go and you would buy videotapes, right? Back then, there was no internet. Well, there was internet, but there was no YouTube, right? YouTube didn't exist. And, technology back then, it wasn't even DVDs. It was VHS cassette tapes. I was a huge pro wrestling fan. I was in Suncoast Videos. I stumbled across the UFCs on VHS, and I started watching them, right? I got UFC 3 and 4. I saw that was my very first exposure to watching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? Or at the time, they were actually calling it Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. When I first started, they were not calling it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. That's another thing. Many years that's evolved, has changed. So right around that time, I got those instruction. I got those tapes. That led me into the door, right? But I stumbled across Pride. Pride Fighting Championships, and in there, the first Pride I ever saw was Pride 10. It was Henzo. Henzo was not wearing a gi, right? So I was aware of like the concept of like, hey, when they're doing MMA, they're not wearing gis, right? And then you fast forward probably to about like maybe 2-3 months into my jiu-jitsu, I heard about Abu Dhabi. And then someone
I just want to chime in for a sec for those who are not aware of some stuff. The UFC is obviously an MMA or mixed martial arts organization, started in 1993, and Pride is a mixed martial arts organization that did exist, and it was out of Japan. That's what Denny was referring to with Pride. And then when he mentions Abu Dhabi is a very prestigious no-gi jiu-jitsu tournament. So just wanted to bring everyone up to speed for any of the non-jiu-jitsu fans. But Denny, as he mentioned, he saw Abu Dhabi and he saw all these guys who were grapplers of different kinds, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, wrestlers, etc., having grappling matches. And he became aware of this no-gi phenomena.
Yeah, but I didn't really think much of it. I'm not gonna lie to you. Not at that particular time, I didn't really think much about gi no gi. Here's the interesting thing. You fast forward a few years, I decided to start wrestling. Now, why did I decide to start wrestling? Because I had a match where because I was competing as a kid.
Jiu-jitsu match.
Correct.
Jiu-jitsu.
A jiu-jitsu match. They grouped me with all these older kids, right? And I ended up losing a match. And when I lost the match, the reason that I lost that match was because of wrestling. It was not because of jiu-jitsu. At that particular moment in my head, it occurred to me, I must train either judo or wrestling. But when I was watching, I at that point, I had about 2 years into jiu-jitsu. I had watched a lot of jiu-jitsu. Even though I had started training judo and I love judo, I was watching what all the guys were doing and I was seeing more wrestling takedowns. And we had at the time in our gym at Charles Gracie's Academy at the time, we had good judo guys. We had good wrestlers. And I would watch the two grapple. The wrestler would always beat the judo guy.
Just pause there for a sec. Just pause right there.
Yes.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think wrestling beats judo, or at least when you were seeing it?
That's a very good question. Here's my thought. In wrestling, if you train American wrestling or freestyle wrestling, folk style or American wrestling, it's the same thing. Or freestyle. Freestyle, everybody international does freestyle, right? But here in America, middle school, high school, the actual sport of wrestling is contested in American folk style rules, right? You don't do freestyle even in America. No one has a freestyle career unless it's on the off season they do freestyle, right? Well, freestyle wrestling, right, or even American wrestling, there's leg takedowns and there's upper body throws, right? It doesn't matter whether you're wearing a gi or you're not wearing a gi. All the wrestling takedowns work. They do. Double leg works, gi or no gi. You know, it's the same thing. It doesn't really need too much adjustment. In judo, not all the throws, they translate over, right? But these guys, they were still training in a gi, and the wrestler guy is still taking down the judo guy. You know, and the guy, by the way, the guy that was, because at the time, we basically had San Francisco State level wrestlers, right? And then black belt judokas, right? But even they were black belts, they're still getting taken down. They were not getting, the wrestlers are still taking them down.
What do you think about this? What do you think about this? I'm actually
I think wrestling, I'm going to be super real. I'm going to give an answer that some people will not like, but it's the reality to me. Wrestling, it's more effective than judo, in my opinion. It's more effective.
So on that note, I don't
for example, right? I can specifically for fighting, and I can point to one fact. The majority of UFC champions have a wrestling base. Like, the only amazing judo player that we think about in MMA, when you think about, oh my God, she had such amazing judo, was Ronda Rousey. Like that's the only huge MMA champion that we think about with judo, right? Like,
it's interesting. My own experience with that. And obviously, I'm sure there's plenty of exceptions. I'm sure there's some amazing judo Olympians and et cetera, et cetera. But I remember when I didn't even do jiu-jitsu yet. I was just a black belt in Kyokushin. And Kyokushin, you have in Kyokushin, you have a very good base. Here comes some Greek coffee.
Unfortunately, it's not Greek coffee. It's some other blend, but it's still good. You know, if I was making Greek coffee, you would see the flidzani. It's those little like cups, you know, that you put above the stove, or like, yeah. But I love coffee.
What is it called? You said it's called what?
Flidzani. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, the flidzani is like the little, small little cups, right? And then there's the bureki, which is like, it's where they make the traditional coffee.
So I was gonna say, when I wasn't even doing jiu-jitsu yet. It's many years ago. I was just a Kyokushin black belt. But in Kyokushin, we're so used to clinching. We just have good, like, we're very sturdy. It's hard to take us down. And I was curious about judo, so I went to a judo school, and no one could take me down. It was weird. I was like, I don't even know judo. I'm a white belt, but I was very good in Kyokushin. And I was like, I didn't even understand throws or anything, but not one judo black belt could take me down. Then the years went on, and I got into jiu-jitsu, and I've had some, good grappling matches with guys who are good at wrestling, and they take me down. So I've had that experience. Now, of course, there's exceptions. I remember when Ronda Rousey fought Miesha Tate. You mentioned Ronda Rousey, and you mentioned her as possibly an exception. Miesha Tate was a very good wrestler, or is a very good wrestler, and Ronda Rousey's very good at judo. And she, in the grappling, she dominated her. Judo kind of won that. But again, like we said, you mentioned Ronda Rousey. It could have just been her. And I think Hector Lombard, who was very good at judo, I saw in the UFC him throw some wrestlers around. So I guess there's those exceptions, but I would agree from my experience, wrestling kind of wins, at least in that context with judo.
I mean, I can name you all the top judo players in the UFC. The best judo player was Ronda Rousey. There's Hector Lombard, right? There was a Japanese player, Sexy Yama, they were calling. Remember him?
Akiyama.
Sexy Yama.
That was his nickname,
Akiyama,
right?
Akiyama, right? Karo Parisian was also, in my opinion, Karo was one of the most effective judo players, and Manny Gambarian. Those are all the top judo players that came throughout the UFC. Maybe I'm forgetting someone, maybe, but those were the ones that made it most effective. And some people would say Fedor was a judo guy. Fedor is and is not. Let me explain. Fedor is a sambo guy. Now, sambo is different. Sambo, it's way more complete than judo, because sambo has the leg takedowns. Because sambo, it's a mixture of judo and wrestling, which, if you came to me and you asked me, you're like, hey, Denny, what do you think about sambo, right? I actually looked for sambo here in this area. There's no one that had credible sambo. So I never went and I trained right with anybody. But I really believe that style. It's the best for takedowns.
For those who don't know, Denny referenced Fedor, who's one of the greatest MMA fighters ever, and he mentioned sambo, which Fedor is an expert at. And he said that sambo, for those who don't know, it's a Russian martial art, which is a bit of a hybrid between maybe judo and wrestling. And even the way they dress, they wear a gi top and they wear shorts. So that even kind of shows you the hybrid, even in the way they dress. And they even have combat sambo, where they also strike. And of course, Habib has a sambo background. So
I mean, when you look at the number of champions, world champions of elite, and when I say world champions, the only world champions that I look at in MMA really are UFC, right? Currently the UFC, because that's the premier organization. It always has been. Plus Pride when it was at the height, right? And I mean, look, Fedor, one of the best fighters ever, sambo champion, right? Khabib, one of the best lightweights of all time. I'm not going to say he's the greatest lightweight of all time, because I don't think it's fair to say. There's other greats too. However, he's another one. And then there's all these guys from his team that, they're dominating.
Denny, let's fast forward a little bit. You obviously had a certain amount of time at Charles Gracie's Academy. You mentioned how you got there, how you loved it, etc. At some point, you moved on you left Charles Gracie's Academy. What was that all about?
That's a long story. It's a very long story. If we're going to simplify that story and make it as simple as possible, I ended up leaving to train with a group of my friends because there were some weird political things going on at the time. And I made the decision to leave. And yeah, Charles didn't like that.
Did you go and, like, for example, when you decided to leave, you said there was some political things going on at the time, you went to train with some of your friends. Was it a thing where you were at Charles's one day and you just made a mental note, well, this is the last time I'm coming here, and then you just left? Or did you go and say, hey, Charles, like, I just want you to know this is like my last day here? Or did you tell some of, I don't know if he had assistant instructors, like, hey, thanks for everything, but I'm leaving? Or did you just kind of say, well, I'm not coming back here anymore? Like, how did that happen?
At the time, Charles and then there was another guy there named Oliver. Oliver he's also like my teacher too at the time. They're both my teachers. They both used to teach me. But Oliver took a lot of special time and interest in me. And he was the one that was training me for all my fights. He was the one that gave me a completely different perspective on jiu-jitsu than Charles. Because Charles's approach was like, all right, you show up, you learn what I teach you. Oliver's approach was completely different. Yeah, you do what I show you, but like he talked about researching people and all this stuff, and it was different mentality, you know. I'm sorry. Can you say that question again?
Sure. So now we're at the point where you mentally decide, I'm done with this place. I was saying, like, did you just kind of go one day and just make a mental note, like, well, this is my last day here, I'm just not coming back anymore? Or did you kind of verbalize it to Charles or Oliver or anyone?
Here's a real funny story. All right, at that particular time, I'm good at jiu-jitsu. I'm already good, and I know it. And I know that I know something that literally the majority of people around me can't comprehend. There's just very big difference on the skill. I'm in high school at the time, and everybody in my high school knew I was a good fighter. All my friends knew. They had seen me fight for real. Because every opportunity I got to test my jiu-jitsu, I did, because I knew that until I turned 18, it didn't have a serious repercussion. So I never turned down a fight. Never. Even for the dumbest fucking reason, I would say, let's go. Now, what happened? My brother and I realized we could make money off me fighting other kids. What did we start doing? My group of friends and I, right? We would get kids from all the different high schools that were known as either good fighters, like just good street fighters, good wrestlers. They were good wrestlers on the wrestling team, or they were good boxers, or whatever. They had some reputation as being a good fighter. And we would organize fights for me to fight them, and my friends would bet on the fights, right? My brother would bet on the fights, my brother would take action, whatever. This started happening.
Your brother was kind of an amateur bookie at the time.
Yes. We started doing this, I was doing really well. I never lost because my jiu-jitsu was that good at that point, at least compared to who I was fighting.
Was it your wrestling plus jiu-jitsu? Because you'd start by taking them down with a wrestling.
I would say that. Yeah, I would say my wrestling and my jiu-jitsu, because I knew how to, because some of these guys that they were wrestlers that I fought, they were actually better at takedowns than me. And it's so funny because what I'm known for, now in my career, my guillotine, right? I know I'm good at the guillotine, right? I was guillotining people back then. Well, I
was imagining as you were describing this, I'm like, well, he probably went up against some good wrestlers, but they didn't know the jiu-jitsu he knew, and he was just guillotining them. So that was just what I thought when you said it.
Exactly. That's exactly what that was.
No, guillotine them, by the way, I have a question. When they would shoot in, did you kind of sprawl a bit and finish them standing, or did you actually end up in a closed guard, or that you were on the concrete so you didn't really want to do that?
I mean, we were pretty much fighting on grass.
Oh, grass. Okay.
We were fighting on grass. We did the fights on the side of my high school where everybody would park the cars, right? As you're walking on the grass area. It's just, I don't know why that was just what decided. So my dad ended up finding out. He's like, hey, I really don't like that you're doing this. He's like, you can get hurt, or you might hurt someone else. He's like, I'm not paying for you to, this is not why I'm sending you to jiu-jitsu, to do these types of things, right? And I'm like, yeah. I'm going with it. He's like, I want you to stop training. And I saw this as an opportunity.
You told him, you said I was going to quit. Now you're telling me to quit.
Yeah, but which, by the way, I brought that up to him. I'm like, hey, didn't you tell me to never quit? And he's like, yeah, but you're already good now. You learned what you learned. It's time to move on. So I agreed. The truth is, I agreed with him that I was going to quit, but I didn't fully give him the real reason.
So in other words,
I never really explained to my dad at the time. That there was some weird political shit going on at my gym. I didn't want to say that to my dad. I didn't know how to explain that to my dad. You know what I mean? But I was like, fuck it. This is a great opportunity. I'm like, I feel like this place is toxic. I'm like, fuck it. I'm gonna quit there, but I'm gonna keep training with my boys. I had no intention of ever stopping jiu-jitsu at that moment. When I'm talking with my dad, he's like, you should quit. I took it, so I'm gonna quit going there, but I'm gonna keep training. So which I didn't say that to my dad. And I think at that point he didn't really know that he thought the only way that I was training was just by going there, when he didn't understand that I had friends and we were training outside of the gym too. Here's something about me. One thing that's really important to understand about me, and this is part of why I am who I am, or I got good at jiu-jitsu. Every opportunity I had to train, whether it was in that gym or not, I took it. I never, you know what I'm saying?
So how did Charles and Oliver and the other guys there discover that you weren't? I mean, I would think that they were like, hey, Danny used to come 5 days a week. He's not here anymore. It became pretty obvious. But how did it become totally clear that you were done with that academy?
Well, I just told them, I'm like, hey, my dad wants me to stop because of this and this, and then, but I stopped there. I was going to Oliver, right? So going to Oliver 3 days a week at that time. I think 3, maybe 4 days max.
So
right?
Oliver had left too?
Yeah, he had left.
Okay, so in other words, before this happened, Oliver, who's kind of your main coach.
It was Oliver and Jamie. They were my main coaches.
So Oliver and Jamie are your main coaches, and then and before you leave, they leave. So there's a point where you're just there and they're gone.
Yeah, but here's what I forgot to tell you. I mean, here's the truth too. Before I left, I had gotten to a high level of competitive jiu-jitsu at that point. Very high level for my age. I was I was fighting the best. You're like, what do you mean? Well, I was at the time, by the time I was an orange belt, which is, in the kids belt to go at the time, I was going white, yellow, orange, right? I was competing against Gracie, who's Hickson's son. Hickson at the time is like the god of jiu-jitsu. He's the god. Everybody like bows down. You know what I'm saying? Like, so
who cornered you against Crone? Who cornered you against Crone?
Charles did. But there was the first time we competed. I'm just being honest. First time we competed, the way the points were calculated was not accurate. And it was supposed to be calculated correctly for me, and it went the other way. The match happened. I knew I got robbed on points. Charles knew I got robbed on that point on that first match. On that,
what did Charles say to you after that? Oh, you got robbed. What can I do?
Well, he told me, he's like, you got robbed, right? And I'm like, yeah, I know I got robbed. And I'm like, why did you say something? He's like, I don't train people to fight my family. And in that moment, I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, dude, why? I'm thinking, why are you here cornering me? You know what I'm saying?
So for all those who didn't quite catch that, Denny's competing against Crone Gracie, son of Hickson Gracie. Charles Gracie, his teacher, is cornering him. Denny loses the fight, or quote, loses the fight, but it was mistabulated. Charles is like, oh, you got robbed. Denny's like, yeah, I know I got robbed. Why didn't you say anything? And Charles says, I don't coach people or train people or teach people to fight against my family. And Denny's thinking like, what am I even doing with you then? Or something like that.
I'm not going to lie to you, in that moment, that particular event, that very event was what broke my trust in him.
Oh, that was the beginning.
After that, I knew. I'm like, all right, because like, that's when I realized, I'm like, man, this guy doesn't have my best interest, but Oliver did. That's why in that moment, I'm like, when I was being coached, I made the decision, even though he was the black belt and the other, Oliver at the time, not a black belt. I'm like, I'm going Oliver because he has my best interest in mind. Even though Charles at the time, he's like my coach, he showed me he does not have my best interest in mind.
So when you leave Charles Gracie officially, you're training with Oliver, you're a teenager, and not too long after that, you're at a tournament, you run into Charles. You already left.
No. What ended up happening was, because of my schedule in school, because I was going to high school at the time, right? Things were getting complex, and I couldn't go to Oliver's as much as I wanted. I wanted to train every day, but because, Oliver was a cop and he's teaching, he couldn't provide that for me. So we talked to Oliver, and I'm like, hey, man, I want to keep training more. I obviously see he was my teacher, but I need to train more. He agreed. And I ended up going to Marco Nascimento. Well, I go to Marco Nascimento, right? And as I go to Marco, I start talking to him, and I tell him, I used to train with Charles, and Marco, he didn't want any beef. He didn't want any beef. And so he says to me, you have to go talk to Charles, and you have to tell Charles that you're going to train with me. I'm like, all right, this is going to be awkward, but let's go. So I go there. I ended up talking to him. I'm like, hey, thank you for everything. He was really, he said some things, and it was very uncomfortable, but whatever. I was a man about it. I went and I talked to him.
You have to actually give yourself credit. That was pretty mature for a teenager. It's very uncomfortable, very awkward. And you went to him and you said that's pretty impressive. Not to mention, in that world, not saying it would always happen or even ever happen, but there's always like that underlying possibility of some violence. So you walked in there as a teenager and told Charles Gracie that. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So what ended up happening there, right? So I keep training at the time, you know, and then so excuse me. So that was that. I stopped, you know. I ended up later on, I was at a tournament and I ended up I was spectating. I was at the Gracie Open. It was run by Caesar, right? And then I go to leave. I was at the tournament spectating. I'm there with my girlfriend at the time.
You're a teenager still.
16. And I go to leave. And as I go to leave, Charles comes up to me and he's like, hey, I want to talk to you. And I'm like, okay, cool. He's like, let's go get your instructor. Right. And then we all go outside and there's the three of us.
Marco
right?
and Nascimento, you and
Yes.
Charles.
Yeah. And then he said to me, he's like, I heard you're talking shit about me. Right. Because that's why he called me outside. He called me outside to confront me and tell me that I'm talking shit about him. Now, this is a long time. You're talking about now like another half. I'm 34 right now. You're talking about that was when I was 16. You're talking about half a lifetime, right? But I still remember this. He's like, you're talking shit. I'm like, I'm talking shit. I'm like, who says that I'm talking shit? He's like, a friend that has a friend that trains at house. That's what he says. Right? I'm like, a friend that has a friend that trains at house. I'm like, I'm trying to pause in my head and I'm trying to think, who do I know? Who do I know at that time that I have spoken to that is a friend that has some friend that trains at house? And I can't think of anybody. I can't think of it. I'm literally like, I can't think. Like, did I say anything to anybody? Did I say anything? And I'm like, I never said shit to anybody. And I don't have any friends at the time that train there because at the time, Jiu-Jitsu is very political. It's way more political than it is now because a lot of people are no one's cross-training at the time. Let me make that really clear. Today, people go to other people's gyms. Hey, how's so-and-so? That doesn't exist. And you can't tell other people that you're cross-training at the time because they're going to consider you a traitor. You know what I'm saying? So that whole vibe of cross-training and all that didn't exist. And like, there's even people today that are in jiu-jitsu, right? They're just starting jiu-jitsu. They cannot understand this mentality. But that was the mentality of the time. I don't agree with it. Clearly, I don't agree with it because like now my students, you go where the fuck you want. I don't care, right? But anyways, I definitely didn't say anything. And I didn't know a friend that has a friend that trained at house, right? And I'm like, this guy's full of shit. And I had seen weird things that had made me thought he was lying to me. He was just trying to start shit. I knew how this guy thought. When you're trained by people, you know how people think, bro. So anyways, you know, I'm like, I'm not talking shit about you, but I know you talk shit about me. You told this guy, Marco, you told him not to train me. And you told him I was a bad kid. You know. And everybody positive, they didn't expect me to say that because I'm a kid, you know. And then, you know, I opened my mouth. I started talking. I opened my mouth and I started saying things that were for real. Next thing I know, this guy comes at me, grabs me, and goes to headbutt me. You know what I'm saying? And then Marco jumps in, breaks, and as he breaks it, goes to kick me. Right? That's what happened. I mean, I was like 16 at the time. This dude's like, what, 40 something? And he's supposed to be a jiu-jitsu teacher. He's getting mad that I told him some shit, so he attacked me. And that was that.
After that, semi-traumatic experience, how did you end up at Eddie Bravo's? Because I'm fast forwarding a little bit.
I had a relationship with Eddie at the time, to where I was going to LA and I was taking private lessons. This situation happens. And when this situation happened, I realized that there was, at that time, my options on where I would go train after that, because of what happened, were very limited. So I had to find a way to have a coach now to train and make progress. And I had to figure out what was the right team for me to go with. And I called Eddie, I explained the situation, and I'm like, yeah, I want to represent you. I want to represent the planet, because at the time, even when I was training in Charles's, I had started taking privates with Eddie, and I was learning his Jiu Jitsu. And when I started learning Jiu Jitsu from Eddie, I'm like, wow, this guy's Jiu Jitsu is completely different.
And for those who don't know, to bring everyone up to speed, Eddie Bravo is a black belt under Jean-Jacques Machado. He learned in the gi, and of course he learned NoGi also. And then he kind of made his own system, which ended up being called 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, which is 100% NoGi based. And that's what Denny was being exposed to in private lessons at the time.
And also how he taught was very different. It's very different. He made jiu-jitsu very clear to me. It was the way he taught. The material was very digestible.
So let's
for my brain.
Let's fast forward. You become Eddie Bravo's first black belt ever. You open your own 10th Planet Academy. You're still competing, even as a brown belt under Eddie, and then ultimately a black belt. Tell me about a couple of memorable world championships that you won, whether it was the actual matches or just the fact that you won one, or anything about it that you want to mention.
I mean, every world title that I won has its own story. There's a story to everything, man. There's a long story to it. My very first world title that I ever won, I was 19. And at the time, there's the IBJJF World Championships in the gi, and there's ADCC, right? But there's no IBJJF NoGi Worlds, right? And I was always waiting. I'm like, I hope they do NoGi Worlds. I think I'm the best in the world at my weight. This is before they ever had that tournament. I think I'm the best at my belt, my weight. By the good luck of the gods, whatever, 2007. And you go from the years of like 2004 to 2007, I was training NoGi. I made that transition in 2004. That's when I started, because I started in 2001, right? But by 2004, I had figured out NoGi was my way. That was my path. I like NoGi better, right? I like NoGi better. So my first world title that I go for, I was 19. I go for the IBJJF Worlds. I win. My first match that I was supposed to have, the guy doesn't make weight. So I get an automatic bye because the guy didn't make weight. Then I had my first actual match. I win that. I choke the guy. Then in the finals, I faced Joel Tudor, and I beat him 2-0. In neither of those matches, no one scored on me. And here's what's interesting. So I beat Joel. And about 10 months after I beat him, what does he do? He taps out Hani Yahya, who at the time is the current Abu Dhabi champion. Because at the time, everybody was talking shit, and they're like, dude, you didn't beat anybody. You didn't beat anybody. You're like, you're a world champion. You didn't beat anybody. 10 months after I beat the guy that I beat, he taps the champion of Abu Dhabi in my weight class. Then people would be like, hey, you beat nobody. Then I'd be like, yo, this and this happened. It's not my fault you ain't paying attention and you don't understand what's going on. So the very first thing that I realized was no one gave me credit. No one gave me credit for my first world title. No one. I mean, my friends did, but people that were not my friends, they were all shitting on me. I was like, wow, I can't believe, like, you know, I thought like I was going to win the worlds and everybody's going to show me love. And I realized, I'm like, man, the majority of these people, they're haters. That was the first thing that you know what I realized when I became a world champion? One of the first like realizations that I had about my success, people were haters. No one was happy that I won. I mean, only my friends and my family were happy that I won. And like the rest, if you're looking at the jiu-jitsu community, they were haters. Part of that, though, was that I was 10th planet. It was a 10th planet hate, you know what I'm saying? And at the time, 10th planet was not cool. It was cool to hate 10th planet. So I get that. It's much different now. Much different story now.
What do you think about just switching gears a little bit, but it's kind of related to the topic we were just talking about. Just in general, taking yourself out of the equation for a moment, what do you think about the gi versus no gi conversation? Now, obviously, some people only train in the gi.
Was right. I was right, and I'll tell you why I was right. I could checkmate anybody. In 2004, I went exclusively no gi. I knew no gi was the future. We are now, today, September 30th, 2022. Wonderful. Yesterday was the 29th. Was 13 years I've been a black belt. The first ever no-gi black belt. It's me. Right? Let's fast forward to where we are. Everybody is saying today that the gi is boring to watch. You go from that time period to now. Winning a gi world title is no longer perceived to be as prestigious. Back then, everybody was saying it was the reverse. Back then, everybody was like, you know, no gi didn't matter. Now it's the reverse. The reverse. All these big shows that are happening now, it's happening in no gi. It's not happening in the gi. You fast forward, here we are 13 years later. It's even much more than that to when I won my first world title. But like, look, all around the world, there's no-gi schools. All around the world, there's like more no-gi tournaments. Why? By the way, why gi versus why is no-gi more popular? I'll tell you why no-gi. Now there's more gi schools around the world than there is no-gi schools. But you're seeing that no-gi is becoming more popular. Why? Because it's real. You're like, what do you mean it's real? I'm not saying that the gi's not real. It is. But if you watch the UFC, they're not fighting in gis. Also, I know that if you get into a fight, if you live in a climate where it's cold, you might wear a jacket. I understand that. In that regard, the gi is practical for self-defense. Not denying that. However, no gi though, it doesn't matter whether he's wearing a jacket or not, it still works. And I just feel like people are, by the way, to the uninformed person that's watching grappling, it can be very boring. Jiu-jitsu can be very boring. No gi makes more sense than the gi to the person that not trained. Watch.
Excellent points all around. I want to just chime in. I want to tell a little Denny story that I witnessed. He probably forgot about this. I'm not going to mention any of the names involved, but it's a very positive story. So, people talk about leverage in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or leverage in Judo, or leverage in Jiu-Jitsu, or whatever. Leverage is talked about a lot, and there's this idea that if you understand leverage, you can, a smaller person can beat a bigger person in some kind of match or fight or self-defense situation or whatever. And, there's these different ideas about that. Now, with that said, just a little bit about Jiu-Jitsu history, at least the way it's been explained to me. Someone like Gracie, who's one of the founders of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, along with his brother Carlos, made a big point many times about size and strength don't really matter. It's all about leverage and technique. And then Carlson Gracie, who is his nephew, brother's son, Carlson Gracie at some point said, no, strength and size do mean something. Of course, you want to have great technique, but strength and size do mean something. And, I would think his athletes were maybe lifting weights or whatever they were doing to increase that. Whatever, that debate is between them. It doesn't matter. But I remember one day.
I can answer. I can make that real simple. Strength and size do not matter as much when you are fighting someone that does not have your skill level.
Right.
If, however, two people are equally skilled, let's say someone's 150 and a guy that's 200, they are equally skilled. The guy that's 200 should win. They're equally skilled and he's got 50 pounds. He should win. The key word is should.
On that note, a good compliment to Denny is one time, like I said, Denny might have forgot this. And like I mentioned, I'm not going to mention the names, but many, many years ago, I was with Denny one day. We were in the gym and there was a guy who was, I think, 100 pounds heavier than Denny. And the role that guy, who was a professional fighter, had before Denny was with another big guy who wasn't quite as big as him, but if this guy was 100 pounds heavier than Denny or 80 pounds heavier than Denny, he was rolling with the guy who was probably 60 pounds heavier than Denny, just a little lighter. And they were having a pretty intense roll. And I remember the guy who was kind of slightly smaller, kind of half joking because they were friends. He was saying like, man, this jiu-jitsu is bullshit, like talking about how size and strength don't matter. I'm getting mauled or whatever. And, because they were, roughly similar skill set. But like Denny said, that really big guy was also really good. And then I watched Denny roll with that guy who must have been 80 pounds heavier and was a pro fighter in his prime. And it was about a draw. But the fact is, I remember I was sitting there marveling. I'm like, people talk about leverage, but, sometimes they can't apply it. I'm like, look at Denny. Denny's got to be nearly 100 pounds lighter than this guy. This guy's a top level world-class grappler and a pro fighter, a ranked pro fighter. And Denny is using technique and it's fine. It was about a draw. I don't know if Denny remembers that, but I'll tell him who it was after. But anyway, so I want to compliment Denny's jiu-jitsu.
Well, do you know what the truth is? Now, most people won't like what I'm going to say, but it's the truth. Even people that are really good at jiu-jitsu, that are known for being really good at jiu-jitsu, suck. They don't know jiu-jitsu. They're just beating people that don't know what they're doing, but they think they know what they're doing. And the people that are beating them, they think they know what they're doing because they're getting the results that they're getting. And then they run into someone that really knows what they're doing. And then they realize, oh no, I don't know what I'm doing.
Great example. Hey, question.
There's so many levels to this game. There's so many levels. And here's the thing. The majority of my life, I've been fortunate enough, and yes, by good fortune, luck, whatever you want to call it, that I've constantly been around all the best fighters before my generation, during my generation, and after my generation. And because of that, I've been exposed to who is the best, what is the best, and what this is. And like, unless you have that experience, you don't comprehend. You don't.
I agree, and I've seen with my own eyes, because I've been present training in the same room with Denny when he's grappled some of the best guys in the world and done just fine. What do you think, Denny, is a good for someone who is training in anything that might be training in a sport or a martial art or jiu-jitsu? What are some of the main, you don't have to go through everything, but what are some of the main principles when it comes to eating, working out, resting, mindset of a champion, like a champion in a sport, we'll call it, whether they're playing whatever sport or jiu-jitsu or whatever? What are some of the things that you think, you don't have to list them all, but what are some of the things that are important to be successful?
The very first thing is consistency. The very first thing is consistency. You must be consistent. It doesn't matter what's going on in your life. You must focus on your mission. Your mission, you must be willing. So, are we talking about you want to be the best?
Or just very successful at the sport you're doing?
You have to be willing to die for your mission.
That's pretty intense.
And you have to be willing to die for your mission. And that's what it is.
Okay.
You have to you have to believe in what you're doing so much that you're willing to die for it. Because if you do, you will succeed and you will surpass many people that don't have that same conviction. Right.
Excellent.
So the very first thing is consistency. You'll notice every jiu-jitsu class that I end, I always say, stay consistent. Why is that? Because if you stop training, you do not get better. It's very simple. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. You're never staying the same. That is an illusion. That is an illusion. Every day, you're either better or you're worse. That's it. That's just how this game works, right? But that's how life works too. You're either better or you're worse every day. Every day. That's the reality to it. So the very first thing is consistency. Consistency, right? You must be consistent no matter what. No matter what. You've heard me say no matter what. This is it. That's it. You've heard me say that.
That's a famous Denny quote. By the way, it's interesting. One of my great healing mentors once told me, really great, one of the great healing mentors I ever met said to me, Pete, in the context of healing, said, patients are either getting better or worse. Like exactly what Denny just said about what he mentioned a minute ago, which reminds me, I wanted to ask you, what are one thing or two things or three things, up to you, that you think in all these years of training like you've done, what are some of the principles of success you've learned that anyone can apply to life, not a sport, not a martial arts context, just anything? Well, I guess you could say consistency is one thing.
Anything that I say about success can be applied to life. Let me explain why. I function in jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is a combat art. That is warfare. Life is war, whether you understand that or not. Let me explain. The first war that you fight is with yourself, always. You're fighting yourself, always. To do or not to do, to be or not to be. You're in conflict with yourself. And then there's conflict with those around you. But if you look at life, for example, we're born into this world. From the moment we're born to the moment that we die, there's war going on the planet. It's war. It's always, now people don't like, there's the reality of what things are, the reality. And then there's the fairy tale of what people would like things to be, right? In order to build a business, any success, any endeavor, that involves you building, involves you fighting. You cannot build without fighting. If I wanted to build, you know what? I'm going to say something really weird. I want a nail salon. It's really weird. This is why I chose. I want a nail salon. I have to fight to have that nail salon. You're like, what do you mean? Well, it's going to be a battle to start that business. It's going to be a fight to get that money. You're always battling. There's always a battle going on in life. There's a constant battle. You're always fighting. This is why I tell people jiu-jitsu is so good, because it's literally life. It's like what happens on the mat is literally what happens in life. You're always fighting.
Question for you. How do you combine, or maybe you don't want to combine, but how do you combine a principle of fighting successfully, like you said, in life, but at the same time, not, for lack of a better word, colliding with everything? Like in one sense, you want to, quote, fight and be successful, but you don't want to just collide with everything around you. What do you think about that?
Very simple. I do jiu-jitsu. I search for the path of least resistance.
Got it. Okay.
Even though everything is fighting, when I'm fighting, I'm still doing jiu-jitsu. You're like, what the fuck does that mean? Sometimes when you say fighting, it's the idea of force with force. That's not my idea of fighting. My idea is looking for the path of least resistance. So even if someone so if I encounter someone, right, and we're arguing, because you're like, how do you not collide? How do you not collide? I have to look to get my way without force, without persuasion. However, force is always on the table. Force, the ability to use force, it's always on the table. It's not what I want. I don't want to use force. But there's never a time when I think, I'm going to let that idea go.
You know, it's interesting when you say that.
Because in order for this idea of the path of least resistance to work, the idea of force must be on the table. They don't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. You must understand that.
It sounds like, it's interesting when you said that. If you study Musashi, not that Musashi said that exactly, but if you study Musashi, at least what I've gotten from him, that is echoed there, at least subtly. And of course, there's other places and contexts in life. Just switching gears as we wrap up. I think in life, when someone, let's say, whatever, they go through a rough time or they fall down or whatever, metaphorically fall down, that's not what people remember or think about. They see when they get back up. Someone's like, it's not that someone had XYZ happen. People see like, look how they recovered from that. Look how well they're doing now. So I think that's important. So without going into all the details, obviously in the last, whatever it's been previous to now, you had some different things go on. And obviously now, you're doing fantastic and doing better and better and will do better and better. Anything that you want to say about that time, without even the details, just to make anything clear, or any of your thoughts or anything you learned or anything about that?
We just jumped through a lot of subjects, right? And the subject that you're asking me about, it's a very complex subject. Can't explain it in 5 minutes. You can't even explain it in 10 minutes. It would need a lot of time and explanation in order for me to get my point across of what happened and all these things, right? Like it's not a simple like a few words, right? Okay. I had health issues, right? Specifically mental health issues. There's many labels people try to put on me. And from what I've learned from my research is they are labels. And that field, it's not fully comprehended, in my opinion. After my last 5 years of going through that system, I still have not been satisfied with the answers that I've been given from doctors. Like, hey, what happened to you? If you ask me what happened with my mental health issues, whatever, there has not been one doctor that's given me good answers. You've given me good answers. You've given me good answers, but no one's really satisfied me with the answers that I've been given. And to tell you the truth, I don't really, I think no one fully comprehends it. That's just my honesty. Here's the most important thing. I'm healthy now. Right? It's the most important thing. I look at like, is it getting better or worse? Right? First thing is, I see that I'm healthy. That's the most important thing. In life, things will happen to you that are unforeseen. Things will happen to you that you're unaware of. And what happened to me for a long time took me a long time to understand what is going on, because I'll use the labels that they've chose. I've had 2 psychotic episodes now, right? That's the label. The other labels, the only labels that I'll accept that I understand, it's that 2 psychotic episodes. The other labels, it's not clear on, but we'll just use those. Here's what's very interesting to me. Someone can literally have a psychotic episode, whatever. I think it's madness. To me, that term is it's madness, and it's literally going crazy. That's how I would say it. That's how. What do you mean psychotic episode? Please give me words to digest. I would say going crazy. I would say madness. This is what I would call it. The most interesting thing to me is you can go crazy and you can come back. You can go crazy and you can come back. And you know what's interesting? From my experience, ever since whatever happened to me, I've seen people around me that have this episode, have psychotic episodes. And I see now more than ever that this is a real problem in the world that we face today. It's a real problem. It's a real problem that is not really being addressed. And I also think no one really understands what it is. I genuinely feel that way. Like, doctors don't understand what it is. And if the doctors don't understand it, how are people to understand it? It's still something that I think is very misunderstood. Now, why it happens, different varieties. Based on my research, it appears that different things contribute to that for different people. But I just think there's still a lot of misunderstanding on that. And here's my thoughts, though, is that no matter, this has been my experience, by the way, and this is actually what's been good for me, is that something terrible like that can happen to you and you can come back. That's the biggest thing. If you were to ask me, you're like, hey, what are your thoughts? Because the first time that it happened, I couldn't comprehend what was fully going on. And I didn't know if I was going to come back. I didn't know. And, but you can come back, but it's not easy. It's actually really hard. Whatever I achieved in my fighting career, right? Whatever I won, whatever. The same dedication that it took to achieve that, I need to have that same dedication to my health. I have to be a Spartan in order to make sure like nothing goes wrong, but I can still be a Spartan. And still that can happen to me. You know? So it's the same thing. There's just certain behaviors that I have to be consistent with.
Well, I'll tell you what, that was a great explanation. I've known you since you were a teenager. You're obviously doing awesome now, so I'm thrilled to see that. I thought that was a fantastic interview, and I just want to say a couple of things about Denny before we sign off. The first thing is I already mentioned, and it should be clear, he's amazing at jiu-jitsu, and I've trained with and been around the best of the best, as Denny knows, and he is really one of the greatest. He's phenomenal at jiu-jitsu. And he's also a great friend. And I think one way you can tell how great your friends are is if you call your friend up for a favor and you go, hey, I need a favor. Some people will say, what? But some people will just say, okay. And Denny's the kind of guy, not that I've called him for that many favors, but anytime I ever needed any favor from Denny, and I called him, hey, Denny, I need a favor. He said, okay, what is it? Which is a sign of a great friend. And he always did it for me. So thank you for that. Thanks for being a great friend.
My pleasure. You're a great friend though too. It works both ways. You know, whenever I've called you, you've always been there for me. And you know, I've known you since I was 18.
I remember.
And now I'm 34. We've been friends for literally half my life.
That's right. So anyway, on that note, do you want anyone who lives in the Bay Area should definitely consider training with Denny, because it's one of the best places you could ever learn jiu-jitsu. Do you want to say what your website is, Denny, so people can find you?
Yeah, the name of my academy is San Francisco Jiu-Jitsu. Website is bjjsanfrancisco.com. I offer a 3-day free trial. So if you're interested, you want to learn, you're not sure, come in, take the 3 classes, see if you like it. If you like it, great, you can stay. If you don't, that's fine. That's that.
Denny, let's conclude with you saying something in Greek and then translating it into English, which is kind of what you want to send everyone off with. Say it in Greek, and then you can translate it to English.
Υγεία και δύναμη πάντα. Υγεία και δύναμη πάντα means health and strength forever.
Awesome. Thank you, and we'll see everyone on the next episode.